So now we're going to take a look at how we actually compose our creature in the image plane. So here is the actual final composed image. I've got the document set to a landscape orientation, and I've got it composed so I feel like there's nice tangencies here at the corners. It's cutting off the shoulders in a reasonable spot. It's not cropped in too tightly. And we've got a bit of head space above the figure so it's not butting its head right up against the edge of the picture plane, which creates a really unpleasant well, not necessarily an unpleasant tension. You can exploit those tensions, but for the purpose of this design, I didn't want his head to be zoomed into the point where it was butting right up against the edges of the picture plane. So the way we position the character on canvas and store that position is using timeline here. You'll see that I've got this timeline at the top of the screen and these two dots. And if I scroll along, it's going to actually restore the position of the model. If I were to change the model position and then click in the timeline, it's going to store another keyframe. So if I just use my arrow keys, I can move between keyframes here and store different model positions. And this is really important because you may come back to this file 6 months later and need to render another pass. Maybe somebody asked to see your creature with a different color or a different type of ear. This allows you to render out the exact same image that's going to be in your Photoshop file at any point in the future. You might be painting a few hours from now and decide that you want to render out a different color. Then having these stored images or stored keyframes will allow you to do that. So the way we get to this timeline here is to go to the movie menu, timeline, and then there's this show button here. And with show turned on, that shows and hides the timeline. And the default keyframe setting is for camera. So all you really need to do is just scale and position your model on canvas in a way that you like, and then just simply click here in the timeline and then store a view. Now it is possible to go into your movie timeline settings, open timeline tracks, and you can actually keyframe things like the perspective settings. So if we have perspective settings checked, then if we go into the draw menu, we can adjust our angle of view and keyframe these as well. So that's another thing to keep in mind, but if you do choose to do that, make absolutely sure at the very beginning of your timeline you keyframe the change or the baseline of your perspective settings. So you want to keyframe your angle of view here just by going to movie, turn on perspective, so the perspective track is now there, and that'll keyframe the perspective. So I'm going to keyframe it there and then keyframe it there. Now when I move to the next view, let's say I want to change my perspective, make your perspective change and then keyframe it there. So that way, if you don't have it keyframed at the very beginning, all through your first keyframe it's going to start changing the camera settings, so it's not going to look like what you want it to look like. So you want a keyframe to start with and then your changed keyframes. Now timeline is not going to save as a Z tool. If you need to save this data, you go to Document, Save As, or excuse me, go to File, Save As. If you go to Document Save As, you're just saving an image. If you go to Tool Save As, you're just saving the Z tool itself. However, if you go to File Save As, you're saving a project file, which is everything that is currently open inside of ZBrush, including the timeline. If you have undo history turned on, it'll actually save your entire undo history, but I don't really recommend that because it creates a really massive file that takes a long time to render if you've been working for a while. It's not usually necessary. So just go to File, Save As, and you'll save it as a BPR or a ZBrush project file.